I'm Mark Horowitz. I'm a senior music specialist in the music division, and I'm here because I'm the one who got the Burt Bacharach collection for the library. So, thank you. Um, and on my right is tonight's music director, Andy Einhorn, the talented, titillating mother, which is an inside joke, but we won't explain it to you. Andy is, you can read his bio in the program, but he's just did Gypsy on Broadway with Audra McDonald. He's Audra McDonald's music director. And before that, he did Hello Dolly with Bette Midler on Broadway. And so, and you're in for a treat tonight. What was I going to say? Oh, and this is a secret. But as of last week, it looks like Andy will be back here in January with Audra. So fingers crossed. So I think we talk about half an hour and then we take about 15 minutes of Q&A. So start thinking about your questions now, and especially if I run out, we can start early. So did you ever meet Burt?
I did not. Sadly, I didn't. But I feel now, after months of working on the material, that I actually have met him through working on the material.
Had you done any of his works before? Or?
I strangely hadn't. It's so funny. I feel, when you asked me to do this, I sort of was like, okay, I would not have been the person that I would have asked to do this, in a loving way, I say. But I just want to thank you, because I actually, I think sometimes as artists, we tend to just find ourselves in just like stuck in a spot in terms of where we're doing our work. And this really has come at a time for me that has been incredibly informative and educational, and both challenging to dive into a completely different side of my musical loves. I mean, I grew up in a household where the music of the 50s and 60s and sort of folk, early rock was played. And I was the kid that was listening to show tunes. And so it was a little bit of a discrepancy in the household. But I think my joke about music always is that they're just little black dots on a page, and it's just sort of how they're interpreted, and style is whatever is pertinent to that particular type of music. So I just want to thank you for letting me come do this and sort of find my way into
Well,
this.
I've known Andy for many years, but we've never worked together before, and working with him for this has been a revelation. And it's just seeing you work with the musicians and singers has been spectacular. So thank you for that. So selecting the songs for this evening's concert, how was that process for you?
Challenging, because there's so much of it. I think one of the things that's incredible about Burt's catalog actually has to do with the sheer volume of it. I would liken him to Irving Berlin or George Gershwin, where ultimately you're literally walking into, you're trying to put a needle in a haystack when you start actually saying, how am I going to showcase this evening? How am I going to find a through line? One of the greatest things about working with Audra now for 20 years has been learning about the art of programming. And actually, both of us learned about the art of programming from one of the greatest artists in the world, the late, great Barbara Cook. I'm actually really struck thinking a lot about Barbara during this evening, because she sang several of Burt's songs. But Burt was a storyteller first. And I think part of what I was looking for in this evening was trying to really tell a story about who Burt was through his music, and trying to understand the person as well as the artist. And I think there's a great deal of humanity and realism inside of all of these songs. So as I was looking for them, it wasn't just because oh, this is a great song, or just because this song was a hit, I needed to make sure that they all were very specific. And then also because I believe part of our job is to delicately educate people about things that they don't know. I love that we have about 30% of the songs in here that people probably have not heard of, and hopefully you understand in hearing the songs why we've chosen them for this evening specifically, because actually they do deserve to have a spotlight put on them, and for us to sort of realize that part of our job is to continue discovering these treasures.
Before we go on, just so you know, I don't know, think you do know, we got the Barbara Cook collection a couple of years ago.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
I will be coming down to explore it.
Were there any songs that you desperately wanted to include and just couldn't?
Yes, actually. I didn't. There are two songs that are not in here tonight. One is "Wishin' and Hopin'," which I love. I know. Should we do it all together? 5, 6, 7, 8. Here we go. And then the other is "Do You Know the Way to San Jose?" Although there's wait, no, don't worry, there is a reference to it, so don't worry, you'll hear one reference to it. But again, I think these evenings are often very challenging because you're looking at so much and you're trying to say, again, like what do I want people to take away from this? And I'd rather have you wanting more after than being like you put too much in here.
Were there any songs that you didn't know that you fell in love with, that were real discoveries for you?
That's actually a great question.
Unlike the others so far.
I actually think I'm going to sort of flip the question a little bit, which was that I found arrangements of specific songs that I didn't know before, because I think part of the incredible thing about Burt as a writer is that the arrangements are uniquely tied to how you heard his songs. For example, if you listen to the Dionne Warwick version of Close to You, and then you listen to the iconic version of Karen Carpenter singing it, it's a very different song. And in Burt's words, it wasn't until he heard Karen Carpenter do the song that he went, oh, that's the song. So I actually think I was more enlightened discovering certain arrangements. And there are two in this evening that I'm just delighted to be presenting because they're just off the charts crazy.
Did you find them in our Bacharach collection?
One of them is, yes. Yes.
How much of the evening's concert is from the Bacharach collection?
There, I would say, is a good 20-25% of the material that is adapted from arrangements from the catalog here.
How much input did you have working with the orchestrator on what the arrangements would be? And
so I worked with an incredible arranger orchestrator named Josh Clayton, who for many years in New York City has been sort of the man behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz, for the Encore series. And the reason I called Josh is because he is a musical savant, and I said he's also a mentor of Jonathan Tunick's, and Jonathan Tunick, who is an incredible Broadway orchestrator, actually had a relationship with Burt Bacharach. He orchestrated Promises, Promises. And because Josh works so intimately with Jonathan, he was the only person that I could think of to do this. And I basically said, you have a 7-piece band, and I'm bringing you arrangements that were scored for a huge string orchestra, as well as a brass, as well as winds. Good luck, go. And Josh and I met regularly, like twice a week for the last month working on this, and we sort of had a late night Google sheet going about our progress. But to me, what was really important wasn't about sort of putting our own voice on things, but actually making sure that we were actually honoring and elevating Burt's voice at all times through the charts that we were doing.
So you selected 7 musicians first?
I did, because you said I could have 7. Thank you.
How did you decide which
That's a great question. One of the things, if you listen to a lot of Burt Bacharach, is its unique orchestration. These were not, you hear tack pianos, it's a lot of high flutes and strings and backing vocals, which I think is unique to that particular era. And I actually think it's iconic to his sound. But when I was trying to figure out seven, ultimately, you're obviously you're always stuck with guitar, bass, drums, and piano. And then when I was looking for the last three, ultimately I realized that through a combination of a woodwind player and a trumpet slash flugelhorn, because flugelhorn was very Burt Bacharach, and trombone, you can actually create a sonic choir with those three instruments. You can build a triad of notes, and also it actually ends up, because of, this is going to sound so stupidly geeky, so forgive me. I won't do this tonight. But the sort of the overtones that end up being created by that choir almost trick your ear to feel like you're hearing a string. So ultimately you end up feeling like, because I hear sound sort of vertically a little bit, so I always think of like, what's the top layer of bread and then what's inside and then the bottom layer of bread. And this choir ends up actually fabricating extra sound on top.
What is a tack piano?
A treated piano. Basically, you would go inside the piano and you would actually trick the piano. It was sort of, a lot of classical composers actually do it, and I'm almost wondering if, because Burt was trained classically, I'm almost wondering if he learned techniques like that from studying classical
But
music.
you didn't do our piano tonight.
No, I would never desecrate your piano here. Only with my playing.
How did you select the musicians? Did you work with all of them before?
Yes, yeah. These, I think like one of the things that I sat here all day today, just sort of quelling in my heart, was like, as just a curator of this event, I'm so touched that I think one of the greatest things about art is to collaborate with people. It's really why I got into this, and it's why I ran screaming from practice rooms, because I didn't like being by myself, was that to be able to email people and say, hey, I'm doing this really interesting thing on this date. Are you interested? And every single person who wrote back was like, yes, I'm in. And I think it's a very gratifying feeling, but it's also, several of these musicians did Gypsy with me last year, and there's just always a sense of coming home together. And what's really nice about the singers that I've selected is I've known all of them from various different parts of my life, and watching them come together as a group is really very special. And yes, that's why they call me Mother, because I've brought them all together to be with me. But there's something. Oftentimes, I always say, like, it's incredible when you're in New York working on a show and doing it 8 times a week, and that building becomes your family. But it's actually events like this tonight that end up meaning more to us as artists, because there's just sort of this kineticism that's thrown into the room when you bring all these people together, and we're all in various different other projects in our lives, but for 24 hours we can all just come down here together and focus on this and find a unity and bring this program to you. And so I think the thing that you'll feel coming off the stage is this just like emanating of love and joy, and of bringing music together and telling this story tonight.
I'm going to cry.
I am too. I mean, I sat up there tonight or this afternoon, and I was like, it's very special to be able to get to do this. And I think those of us who do it so often actually genuinely forget what it actually means to be able to get up there and do that, So it's not lost on us, especially in the times that we're living in right now, to be able to escape. And I think, again, I think a large part of, I mean, who in this room loves Burt Bacharach? But I think if I were to ask every single one of you why you love this music, I actually think it has something to do with the immediacy and connection to the human condition. And I think that's actually why it's fundamentally appreciated and both underappreciated as work.
What was the rehearsal process like in New York? How much did you rehearse, and did the musicians all get together ever in New York? Or?
Yes, we luckily found a way to get 12 people's schedules to come together, which was a miracle. I was like, oh my God, this is never going to come together. I met with each of the singers individually for several hours at my apartment to just sort of, I like to walk them through stuff individually because it's a time for me to get to connect with them, you know, and just sort of walk them through the arc of the show, because that's really important to me, is the flow of the evening, so they understand how everything fits into this. And then Saturday morning for 5 hours, we all got together and we started and went. And at the end, I was like, okay, we made it to the end of this. And you know, what was really nice was I was able to send music to everybody ahead of time, and people came in with an idea of what we were doing. And then today, and everybody came down yesterday. Some people had matinees that they performed in, and then they hopped on a cella. And then we're all here. We were here today. But it's been, I mean, they're literally, where's the wood? Okay. This has been a joy. And I rarely say that. Trust me. Those who have worked with me will know that.
Just so people know, I only met Burt once, and it was when he came here for the Gershwin Prize, and I was sort of his escort there, and then I did an interview with him that's online, so if you want to search for that, I think it's pretty good.
It's a great interview.
But the thing, Burt was in his mid to late 80s at the time, and I literally had trouble keeping up with him physically. And this was long before the cane and all of that. I mean, we did the interview in this building, and walking through the halls, I was sort of like running next to him. It was extraordinary. He was and charming and light and fun and really good.
I think the other thing that I'm really struck by him is, how would I just say, there's like a sort of spontaneous yet carefully constructed quality to all of his music. I think when you listen to these songs, there's something about them that feels like they've always been here, yet they're constantly surprising. Does that make sense? And that's been one of the things for me that's been such a great pleasure about learning about all of them, is really sort of getting into the weeds of seeing that he was kind of a rule breaker in that way. But yet somehow when we hear the songs, they still feel very rooted in comfort food, as I might say.
My colleague Jane Cross processed the Bacharach collection, and she put together a wonderful exhibit display in the Coolidge lobby, so I encourage you all to take a look at that. And I think we can open it up to questions from the audience. Yes? Wait, they're running around with...
Getting you a mic.
We're getting you a mic.
Thank you. Will you tell us the story of how his wife came to present the collection to you? How that came about? Was there a chase involved? Or?
She didn't come with the collection. She was only here once before, which was for the Gershwin Prize. And Burt had an assistant named Sue Main, who was his everything, his right hand. And she was magnificent in getting the collection together, organizing it, and working with us to get it shipped and all of that. The Bacharach family is all supposed to be here this evening, so we're very excited about that. So they came back for this, and Sue will be here too, so I'm very happy about that too. Yes. Wait, let's get you the microphone.
Which one?
Here, first row.
There you go, sir. Thank you.
I've been tantalized by your references from both of you of the arc of the show. And I know that with a treasure trove like the Burt Bacharach collection, it's like opening Alibaba's cave. How am I going to assemble all these jewels into something that seems to have a connection? And I know we are going to experience it when we go in there. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. I've had a similar experience when I've done work with visual artists, how do you put an exhibition together? Which of the pieces of chocolate candy do you assemble to make something more than simply a sampler?
That's a great question. For me, this is subversively chronological, but you wouldn't be aware of it. And I hope that's the case. I actually think it has more to do with figuring out the cadence of like the various tempi of songs and then how I'm grouping them together and then figuring out where I'm going to speak in the evening. But the most important part of the evening is I have tent poles in my head of sort of where I need emotional beats to shift in the show, and I don't want to totally give those away to you, but there are two very pivotal moments for me that are going to, I think, sort of be the next notch as you dial the thing up, so that ultimately at the end of the program, we've left you on an emotional high from what the feeling of this music should be, because my way into this music is understanding it from an emotional place. We're not analyzing Stravinsky. We're not, analyzing Anton Webern. So to me, the thing that I had to find in it was the emotional core. And until I found that, I wasn't sure what story I needed to be able to get up on stage and tell, because I think emotional truth-telling is actually the best way we communicate as artists on stage. And I'm enormously moved by the 5 singers that we have tonight, because they are each profoundly interesting communicators. They are all very different people, but somehow they're bringing a very sort of timeless contemporary sensibility to the music, and I hope you're as proud of them as I am. A mother.
And if I can add, I scanned, I think, something over 220 songs for Andy, and then I created a spreadsheet with links to YouTube recordings of all those songs, and the lyricist's name and the date of it, so you could sort it by year or lyricist and stuff like that. So I think it was very unfair to him, but
No, it was very helpful.
but anyway, yes, back there.
So I think maybe Hal David is Burt Bacharach's most famous collaborator, but Elvis Costello did at least one wonderful album with Burt Bacharach, and then even just a few years ago with Stephen Sater, a new musical. So will we hear the whole range of work?
Yes, you shall. No stone is unturned here tonight.
Glad to
I
hear
actually
that.
think it's important to, I mean, he wrote over 230 songs with Hal David, and obviously that was sort of a foundation of what the catalog is. But I think when you look at, his work with Carol Bayer Sager, Stephen Sater, Elvis Costello, Neil Diamond, he actually also wrote songs with Hal's brother, Mac David. What I was struck by seeing that work is Burt really never changed who he was as a composer or a melodist. I think when you think of somebody like, the example I always think of is Richard Rodgers. When you listen to Rodgers and Hart, that sounds a very specific way. When you listen to Rodgers and Hammerstein, this is different. Same writer, but I think harmonically and sort of because of the structure of how those two lyricists wrote words, they were so different. But I actually think that Burt sort of pushed his lyricist to say, this is who I am. You're coming to my party. And I love that.
My sense with the Elvis Costello was that they were sparer, that it was a less is more side of Burt Bacharach.
Mhm.
And
but it still innately sounds like Burt, and there's still harmonic shifts or metric shifts where sometimes you would expect the downbeat to be where he's going to put a emphasis, as I might say, and then he shifts it over to the second beat of the bar.
Are the meter changes difficult to conduct, to learn?
Are you only saying because we ran through several things multiple times today? That's a really good question. I think I'm going to say something sacrilegious, and you're going to hate me forever after I say this. Sometimes musicians tend to overcomplicate things. So the likeness of this that I would say is like sometimes when you look at Sondheim's work, I often think there's a beautiful complication to his work, but when I'm teaching Sondheim, I always try to do my Schenkerian analysis and bring it back to its most basic form so people understand that at the end of the day, Sondheim is still a, 1/4/5 composer and still finding, the tonic, predominant, dominant form in music. And I would liken that in this music to when there are metric complications. I found when I was working with the singers, if I could explain to them that it was the way that Burt understood text and how one would speak it, that's then how you sort of unlearn what feels difficult about that.
If anybody here doesn't know, we got the Sondheim collection last year too. And you just reminded me, with the singers, you also have them doing background vocals. And my sense is they all read music.
Yes, I only asked people who could read music for this. Just because of how much music I knew it was going to be.
I asked them, and they said, in their experience, only about 30% of singers read music, which I thought was interesting.
Sadly, yes. I remember when I moved to New York, I was like, suddenly everybody will be able to read music. And then I was like, no, they all just pull out their, back then there were tape recorders. And they would pull that out. Can you record that again?
Questions? Yes.
I got you. Michael, sir.
How do members of the public access the library if you were to come to the library to dive deep into one of the collections? How would you recommend?
I'm happily able to answer that. Anyone can come to the music division of the Library of Congress. It's in the Madison building across the street. The only thing you need is a reader ID card, and to get that, all you need is a driver's license or a passport. Online, there are finding aids for all the special collections. There's several hundred special collections of the papers of composers, lyricists, singers, musicians, and we call ourselves the music division, but the reality is we also collect in theater and dance, and our reading room is called the Performing Arts Reading Room. But you look at the finding aids and you see, the manuscript for Send in the Clowns is in box 52, folder 13. So you put in a call slip for box 52 and it's brought to we're not an open stack library. You request by box and the boxes are brought to your table. But we welcome everybody, and I hope to see some of you in the reading room because that's what we're there for, and that's why we process these collections and acquire them. So
I desperately wish I lived here. I would be here all the time. I mean, there's something I have to say. Even going through these papers, like when you're like holding this, and you're thinking, "My gosh, I'm actually holding history," and there's just something so moving, especially as a musician. Like I think it was like 2 years I came and I saw all the Rogers manuscripts of Carousel and Sound of Music, and I just sat there and I was like weeping just looking at that, because there's something so astonishing about seeing it. You know it exists, but to actually see it and feel it, there's something beautiful about it.
With the Sondheim collection, we've had to have a box of Kleenex in the reading room.
Oh,
Seriously,
God,
because
yes.
so many researchers come and they open a box and open a folder for the first time and they see his hand and they start tearing up, which is very gratifying and moving to us. But yeah. So, question back there.
Yeah. Can I ask pedagogically, in terms of teaching a song to somebody who reads, as one of my teachers said, reads dots or goes by the tapes, I find sometimes looking at a score, it's kind of intimidating when you see all of these time changes. And it would be, psychologically, I keep thinking, it's probably easier if I just heard it the way people did for, millennia and transmitted orally, AUR. But pedagogically, I'm curious in following on your statement about coming to New York and discovering that, no, not everybody reads. How do you approach, and is there a certain way that you teach for certain types of music versus others, from starting with the score or starting just by ear?
In 2010, I had the great fortune of working with Barbara Cook, and we were doing a review on Broadway called Sondheim on Sondheim. And James Lapine had very cruelly picked a piece of music with enormous metric complexity for her. And if anybody in this room doesn't know, Barbara Cook did not read music, which is kind of incredible when you think about the vast canon of work that she sang, which meant that I asked her if that meant when she sang Glitter and Be Gay, did somebody actually literally teach her note by note? And she said, oh yes, honey, and I tortured the shit out of them. I learned more about music from anybody than Barbara Cook. And she was the person that actually made me realize how you can teach somebody music, because she was such an exquisite communicator of lyric. And I would be sitting there, trying to teach her the rhythm, and she'd say, no, just stop. Let me just try to sing it. And does it sound like I'm just speaking, but through music? And it was such a poignant way of describing it to me that it stuck with me forever, because at the end of the day, singing in every way has something to do with being able to vibrate and communicate slightly one layer on top. Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's just heightened emotion that's pitched, and the rhythm is actually more about the cadence of how we need to hear the language. And when we can ascribe that cadence at the tempo of what the music is doing, then it doesn't, it defies meter. And ultimately, I think we as lovers of music need to get to a place where when you're presenting the music, you shouldn't need to feel the meter changes. I just had a very transformative experience about a month ago when I went to see this new production of Tristan and Isolde at the Met, and a friend of mine happened to be singing Tristan. And I said to him afterwards, I said, I was so moved by this that I felt like I was in one long tone poem for the evening. I was never aware of where the phrases were beginning and ending, because it just felt seamless to me. And I didn't hear meter inside of it. And to me, I felt like that was the greatest compliment I could give to a singer.
In the rehearsals today, one of the singers this evening is Liz Calloway. And what knocked me out was her intelligence and how much of you could tell it was all based on the lyric. And that was what came first, I think. And that's...
For sure. And I think one of the things that I've loved about working with the singers on this is because they're all smart performers. When I assigned the material, I was very, very careful about who I gave which songs to. And part of that initial rehearsal process was me explaining to each singer what their solos meant to me and how I heard those solos. And those are the beautiful conversations that nobody gets to hear, unfortunately, but those are really my favorite times in a rehearsal because I think performances are wonderful, but performances are just another rehearsal. And I think those early moments of a singer asking me the intent behind a particular passage or how to really find the shape of a song is so crucial to how we hear music. You know, I think we're moved when we intrinsically feel something. I mean, I think, unfortunately, I'm going to make a disastrous statement, but I feel like in a lot of today's pop music, tempo has been imposed in such a manner that it's forcing us to feel a certain way. When you listen to the records that Burt cut with Dionne Warwick or Aretha Franklin or any of the singers that he worked with, you feel their heartbeat. And their heartbeat is actually instructing you how you need to be listening to the song. Ergo, you can then be made to have your own opinion how you're going to feel about it, rather than being told, this is how I need you to feel about this music.
In this concert this evening, how much were you guided by the recordings, by Dionne Warwick's version or something like that, or did you?
I think these are. I think there's a great deal of loving homage without feeling tethered, because I think also part of the challenge in an evening like this is because we're doing such a breadth of material. I think you have to find leeway sometimes of tempi so that ultimately, again, the whole flow of the evening can come out the way it needs to.
Yes.
Two quick questions. Can you say a few more words about the feel of Burt's arrangements with the flutes, flugelhorns, strings, vocals? And second quick question, did you happen to see the Mark Morris Dance Company do their evening-long Burt Bacharach dance pieces, which was great?
Sadly, I did not, and I need to go look that up. Oh, the feeling. I mean, I think the only way I can describe it is that it's very vivid. I think, like, to me, this music exists in very, very, very dark, rich colors. I don't hear these songs, even a song like Wishin' and Hopin' or a song like Say a Little Prayer. There's a gravity towards the material. It's not just frothy pop. It has depth and it has weight to it. And I think I'm the last note I gave all of the singers tonight before I came here was treat each song as an entity before you move on to your next beat tonight, because it's really important to me that we sort of say it's a Zets, like I just want everything to land before you move on. Sometimes you feel like people are just racing onto the next beat, but I think part of this is these are 3.5 minute French meals. You go through like multiple courses and then you get to the end and you want to feel satisfied. And I think there is something about all of the arrangements that when you listen to them, you feel. I know I've learned a great deal about arranging just from working on this material, and it's going to inform the next thing I work on starting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.
Is there an American composer whose work you think has been unjustly forgotten?
Yes, sir.
Wow. I mean, somebody that comes to mind for me that I feel is underappreciated is Frank Lesser. to me, I mean, he was not prolific in the way of sort of Burt Bacharach, but he was a melodist and a harmonist beyond. I mean, years ago, I went to the Lincoln Center Library to look at all the documents from his musical Most Happy Fella, which to me is basically an American opera. And I was staggered by seeing the scribbles on cocktail napkins and such. But like, there was this coven of people, Julie Stein, Frank Lesser, Meredith Willson. They were all very sophisticated harmonically, and I miss that. I feel like sometimes I consider myself a dinosaur when it comes to some of this stuff, but I miss people who understood putting in extensions into chords. So basically, if you have a major chord and you start adding other notes, like the extensions to those, because they understood what that did to the value of a chord.
And I'll add Harold Arlen is.
Oh, well,
He's,
I mean,
I think.
he had some good tunes. What can I say?
I apologize if people don't know what I'm talking about, but you know, from like Stephen Foster right up until the present, most composers, you know, are of pop song I'm talking about, would follow the, you know, the AABA, where you sing a line, then you repeat the line, then you sing a different line, and then you go back to the first line. And the thing that I loved about Burt Bacharach is he did that somewhat, but he also would go off on his own. And I think the same thing is also true of Stephen Sondheim. And I think that's why, at least in my lifetime of 70 some odd years, those two composers stick out at me as such creative pop songwriters. I don't know if you have anything to say about that or add to that.
I would agree with you entirely. I mean, I think the greatness of a writer like Burt Bacharach or Stephen Sondheim is because they are able to synthesize what has come before and to figure out how to push that forward. And I would describe that of, say, somebody like Lin-Manuel Miranda in the sense of like what he's doing to the American musical, which is understanding form and then figuring out how to make your own version of that rather than copying somebody else's version. And I don't think in any way that Burt Bacharach was an imitator. I think he was singular, and I think his choices in particular songs were always very deftly prescriptive.
And if I don't mean to correct you, but my sense is, and others may disagree, that it didn't start with Stephen Foster, really. It was really Jerome Kern, I think, who standardized the 32-bar AABA song. It was a little later than Foster. It was with Kern, I think. But
Also a great writer.
I took a look at the program that you're going to do tonight, and there are a number of selections from the musical theater piece Promises, Promises. And I may be wrong, and correct me. Beat me with a wet noodle. But it seems to me that most of Burt Bacharach's songs were individual songs, and that it was very rare for him to write a score for a musical theater production. And those two kinds of writing, it seems to me, are quite different, because when you're writing for a show, you have to figure out how to make the songs that will work with the plot, with the script, etc. So I wonder if you have some thoughts on how he made that decision and why he didn't write more scores for theater pieces.
That's a great question. I actually see it as an evolution. I think when he was writing for the studio, which was the primary early part of his career in sort of, say, the late 50s to almost the late 60s, the studio was just a voice of of an extension of the human voice, no matter who was singing it. I think when he was asked to do Promises, he had also at that time had the chance to write a few films. And I think it was, I think the introduction of character came to him as an understanding of needing to score for film characters, because he said one of the things that was challenging for him on film was that he would watch rough cuts of films over and over. Like he would keep rewatching the scene and then have conversations with directors to try to get inside the head of who those characters were. So I think when he was approached about doing the musical, I think also there was probably a sense of David Merrick holding a gun to his head, and saying, you are going to do this. And also Neil Simon suggesting him to do it. So you had two very formidable talents saying, you're going to do this. I think actually he was interested in the challenge, as it were. What's really unfortunate is towards the end of his life, there actually were a few musical projects that he actually was working on, and some things that never ended up coming to fruition. So I think he walked away from the Broadway musical experience almost with sort of a very complicated feeling about it, because I don't think, obviously he had worked for David Merrick. I don't think it was an easy journey, but the show was obviously a big success. And out of that show, he did the thing that pop composers of the time were able to do, which was that you would have, you know, if you think about Rodgers and Hammerstein or Lerner and Loewe, Frank Lesser, songs from those musicals would pop out and they were pop music of the day. This happened with Promises. There were songs that jumped out of there, you know, I'll Never Fall in Love Again, Knowing When to Leave, maybe even the title song, one could say. You know, these songs popped out of the show and became radio hits. And so I think he felt like he had found his way of doing theater. But after that, I think he felt like he needed a break, a sabbatical for a while from it. And then I think it was later in life with Steven Sater and a few other collaborators that he wanted to start really getting more into it, because I think he did enjoy the challenge of finding what a character needed to say and realizing, oh, you have a book scene. Okay, now we drop in for the beat of what the song is going to say, and how do we leave the song in a different spot than we began.
Yeah, two things about that. One is Burt actually had pop recordings made of some of the songs from Promises that were released before the show opened, because he believed the promotion would help the show, and I think it did. And also the one film musical he made was Lost Horizon, which was, I think, aside from the score, something of a disaster. And I think that scared him off too.
Hello.
I think we're time.
Thank
So have a wonderful time.
I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.